Hello, everybody. How are we doing today? Welcome to Dragon Den. We're back with UrU. Just got done stuffing my face with a crumble cookie. I think it was like the lemon one, whatever zero one they had this week. Hi, Clipturn. How you doing? I'm ready. I'm ready for it. I got myself like 4 waters over here. Several different flavors of liquid death, including just a normal bottled water. But yeah, how go things in the deep city? Oh, they're going great. Yesterday we just finished up the main story, and today we're going to be deep diving into some of the expansions. However, before we do that, we have something very important to do. We've completed the main story, yeah, and we still have to do the expansions, the 2 expansions. But we also have to do the lore roof. I was saving the lore roof for today because it's a lot of reading. That's going to be our first stop. I can remember which one. The lore roof's your favorite spot? Well, hey, you jumped in at the correct time. What is it? You have a suggestion for the lore roof in terms of which order to read them? Almost as much lore as Hall of the Kings. Wow. Which one was it? It's not that one. Was it this one? This one? Okay. Okay. Yes. Here we go. Let me go ahead and, pause the Spotify music. Yeah, no, we haven't started the 2 Dunny expansion yet. That's what we're going to be doing today after we finish up with the lore roof. Found this yesterday, and I was recommended by Clip to save it for its own thing, so. So start with the table that has the Mysterium thing on it. The Mysterium thing? This? The Frisbee? Okay. Got what looked to be 4? Hey, the manhole. I've heard of that. It's like, isn't this one of the first games Cyan ever actually made? Oh no. Mowage. Mowage is what brings us into... Oh god. Oh, that's cool. It's your first computer game too. That's awesome. Marriage. Much more than modern cultures, within Dunny culture, all citizens were expected to marry. In fact, it was even believed that marriage was an important part of a relationship with Yavo, as it taught Y-A-H-V-O, Yavo, as it taught and revealed the necessary requirements for such a relationship. Both marriage relationships and the relationship with Yavo were described by the same Dunny word, Tagon. Literally translated, the word means to love with the mind, and implied a deep understanding, respect, and most importantly, unselfish love for one another. Obviously, the religious influence on most of Dunny culture was very strong, and as a result, marriage was not something taken lightly. It was considered a lifetime commitment, and for Dunny, who could live to be 300 years old, it obviously was not a decision that Dunny felt should be rushed into, and seems as though it rarely was. Some records point to rare arranged marriages, although for the most part it seems that the decision was up to the individuals. Marriage was not permitted before the age of 25, and marriage between blood relatives was strictly forbidden. Though allowed, marriage between the classes was looked down upon. Marriage to other worlders was practically unheard of. Atris marrying Catherine. I found certain writings from the 9000s going so far as to call the mixing of Dunny blood with outside cultures a travesty, while others wrote such a child who marries an outsider was better off dead. The marriage ceremony itself was not a single-day event, but one that took over 5 days. Attendance to those sections of the ceremony to which one was invited was extremely important, and it was considered a disgrace to be invited and not to attend. The event usually began with a small ceremony held on the evening before the first day of the marriage ceremony. The ceremony always took place at the home of the groom or his parents, and was meant to confirm both the bride and groom's decision to be united to one another in front of their immediate family. The groom presented his bride-to-be with a gift representing the confirmation of his choice. The acceptance of the gift by the bride-to-be was acknowledgement of her decision. Immediately after her acceptance of the gift, the bride-to-be was escorted away with her family and not to be seen by the groom until the joining ceremony that would take place on the 5th day. The first day was meant to be for the bride and groom to spend time with their families. As they were starting their own family would no longer be the highest priority. Thus, the day was set aside to spend time with that original family. Traditionally, the day ended with a large meal as well as speeches and blessings from the parent to the child. The second day was set aside for the bride and groom to spend with friends, both married and unmarried. Traditionally, one of the friends would host a large dinner at the end of the day. The third day was reserved for spending time with the soon-to-be in-laws. It was on the day that the bride and groom the bride and groom received blessings from their in-laws as well as other members of the family. Again, there was a traditional larger meal at the end of the day marked by speeches from the eventual in-laws and other soon-to-be family members. The fourth day was meant for the couple to spend time alone with Yavo individually. Though many apparently viewed the day as a formality, others viewed it as the most significant of all the days. The day was often filled with prayer, asking for Yavo's blessings upon the event, as well as a time to understand Yavo's desires for the new lives together. It was also considered a time to purify themselves before Yavo. Some chose to spend time with the priests or prophets, while others read the holy books and talked to Yavo himself. The 5th day was the day of joining. The early portion of the day was set aside for physical preparation, while the later part of the day was set aside for the joining ceremony itself. For those who did not have access to private ages, the ceremony usually took place on marriage ages. For the upper classes, the ceremony took place in family ages. All family was expected to attend, as were fellow guild members. All of those in attendance were divided into 2 sides. One side represented the groom, while the other represented the bride. Between the 2 sides, in the center, were a long aisle and a triangular podium. The bride and groom would each approach their side of the podium by walking through their respective family and friends. It was, after all, those family and friends who had made the bride and groom who and what they were, and the Dunny believed it was those family and friends who should present the bride and groom to their spouse. The priestess usually stood on the 3rd side of the podium. As with most important events, and especially marriage, the bride and groom wore the bracelets they had been given at birth, as well as maturity. After the bride and groom arrived to the platform, the father of the bride would remove the bride's bracelets and give them to the groom. The Dunny believed the giving of the bracelets represented the giving of the bride's purity and adulthood to the groom. A short speech often followed the event. The father of the groom would follow the father of the bride with the identical procedure, giving his son to the bride. The giving of the children was followed by an expression of both parents of their blessings upon those being joined, as well as all of those present. Symbolically, the bride and groom then switched sides to represent of an acceptance of all the bride's family and friends of the grooms and vice versa. Both the bride and the groom then handed all 4 bracelets to the priestess. While the priestess led the couple through their commitments to one another, Yavo, the bride, and groom placed their hands upon the podium. During the commitments, the couple made promises to one another, followed by promises to Yavo. All were recited aloud to the priestess. This is really this has a lot of similarities to Christianity weddings, actually. The priestess usually reminded the couple that marriage was a reminder of Tagon, to know with the mind, and that their love should always be a representation of their love for Yavo. Following the commitments, the priest would place 2 new, larger bracelets upon the bride and groom. The groom's was placed upon the left wrist and the bride's the right wrist. Also very symbolic of, like, the rings. Dunny culture is very Abrahamic in its traditions. It's also probably because Miller's never Christian. That makes sense. Following the commitments, the priest would place a 2 larger bracelets. The groom was placed upon the left wrist, right on the right wrist. The new bracelets were meant to represent both the purity and maturity bracelets their spouse had previously worn. The Dunny emphasized that the spouse was now your responsibility to keep pure and knowledgeable of good and evil. The bracelets were meant to be a constant reminder of that responsibility, as well as commitment to maintain the best for that spouse. After the new bracelets were placed upon the wrists, the hands of the bride and groom were wrapped together with a tight cord, covering the wrists and the hands completely. Upon completion, the priest placed a ring upon the pinky of each free hand. The rings were symbolic reminders of the entire ceremony and placed upon the 5th finger to represent the joining that took place on the 5th day. Wait. Huh. Okay. The priest would then usually remove himself from the podium so that the couple could take her place. Or the priestess would then remove herself from the podium so the couple could take her place. Together, the couple then walked down the aisle between the 2 parties and toward the far end of the aisle where a glass of wine waited for them. Before drinking, the couple knelt and prayed together to Yavo. After the prayer, they each drank from the cup, and 2 sides of the hall merged into one group, often with great celebration. They were now considered joined, and the celebration could begin. Families usually fed all in attendance, and there was typically dancing and music. The couple was expected to keep their hands united throughout the night as a reminder that they were now joined both in the eyes of man and Yavo. The binding of the hands was apparently meant to be somewhat troublesome, symbolizing that they would be difficult times to their relationship, but that those times did not affect the fact they were now joined. I love that. I actually love that. Wow. Okay. Following the celebration, the tradition was for the couple to embrace and the priestess to touch a linking book to them so that they would both link to a vacation or honeymoon age. Though these vacations were usually short, it was not unusual for the man to not work for up to a year in order to build the new marriage. I should also note that the cord used to join the couple's hands together was also viewed as a sacred item. It seems as though various couples used the cords in a variety of different ways, some using them for necklaces and others hanging them in their house. Abrahamic being Christian, Jewish, and Islamic. The 3, yeah. Hi, Kazuki. You're not too late. This is the first book we read. It was about the Dunny cultures of marriage, which is actually very fascinating, very, very, very Abrahamic, as Parker has said. Gin's attempt at marrying Catherine didn't seem that extensive compared to what. Yeah, I was literally just thinking about that. Like, it seemed like 30 days. Forget it was 30 days, was it not? Not 5, which seems very weird considering how much Gin liked the number 5. Maturity. Okay, let me. Oh gosh, my voice is already starting to get gravelly, and that's only been 1 book. Okay. Similar to a variety of other cultures, the Dunny celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. The Dunny believed that the true maturity, or the age of reason as they called it, was achieved at the age of 25. Which, that's funny, because don't the Dunny have a base 25 numbering system? So, like, as soon as you... Huh, that's funny. Before that, the Dunny believed that children's minds and hearts were not properly formed. Gen's also pretty much broke by Dunny standards. That's fair. Until that time, they even went so far as to say it was impossible for a child to truly make a correct decision, as they were too easily controlled by other modes. Damn. Okay. That did not mean that what they did was not right or wrong, but the Dunny believed that Yavo did not hold them accountable for those decisions. Okay, interesting. Up to that point, it was apparently up to the parents to judge and protect, and thus another reason society encouraged couples to only have one child at a time under 25. In the ceremony of readiness, the Dunny celebrated a child's entrance into reason and maturity. At the ceremony, the child was presented with a bracelet of knowledge, also translated maturity. I have to admit the translation is somewhat poor and makes it sound like a magical or superstitious item, something it did not sound like to them. In fact, it was a fairly serious item. This is having very much like quinceañera or like Sweet 16 vibes in modern culture, 16 kind of being the age of maturity, I feel like. The Dunny viewed the bracelets as a sign of accountability. The individual, once given the bracelet, was expected to be responsible for his or her actions, as he or she had true knowledge of good and evil and the wisdom to make the right choices between both. Associated with the bracelet were certain rights as well as expectations to behave in a more correct manner. From a religious standpoint, the ceremony of readiness signaled accountability to Yavo as well as fellow Dunny citizens. No longer were parents judged for the actions of their children on a religious level, and no longer was lack of knowledge an excuse to Yavo. The Maker, they believed, now expected much more from them. Though the age of reason was 25, the Dunny did not consider true wisdom to come until much later. With not nearly the fanfare that the age of reason brought, at 125 years of age, there was another celebration for reaching the age of wisdom. Perhaps most importantly, regarding that status, the Dunny were allowed to become highest ranks of teachers or leaders, grand masters or lords. The same rules applied to women, and no women under the age of 125 was technically allowed to advise, especially the kings, as well as it appeared that a woman's fertility ended around age 125. During the time of kings, advisors were required for those kings who were under the age of 125, as the king himself had not achieved the age of wisdom. The great king Alcindar was the only king who did not have an official advisor, even though he was under the age of wisdom for the majority of his reign. It's funny because 5 times 25 equals 125. Yeah. Huh. Interesting. Okay, this is fascinating, learning about how the Dunny culture actually functioned and seeing the similarities between our own modern cultures. Why is this? Okay. Pregnancy. Now, this is surprising. I can't say for sure, but it seems fairly clear that Dunny women were only fertile for 1 Dunny day every 2 Dunny months. Oh, I learned in Book of Atris what a Dunny month was, because Dunny time is different. I completely forgot, though. Fertile for 1 Dunny day every 2 Dunny months. In surface terms, that's roughly only 30 hours every 72 days. If true, it explains quite a few things. First, why there were so few children for a people who lived 300 years, and secondly, the reason behind the rather large celebrations of pregnancy. 625 would have been a significant age for Dunny if they had lived that long. As far as I can tell, these celebrations were usually limited to family members, although they were rather large. There was quite a bit of prayer to Yavo as well as blessings from the family members. These blessings usually included vows to care for the pregnant woman and child through the coming months. As I have mentioned in other areas, pregnant women were believed to be much more insightful as a result. Part of the pregnancy experience, although not part of the official ceremony, was using that insight to gain revelation from Yavo. Though there was quite a bit of religious meditation expected of women during this time, I won't go into it here. However, this meditation was to primarily guide the women into her child's future and its purpose, and was taken rather seriously. Hey, Sunpraiser, how you doing? Good to see you. Pregante. While pregnancy within marriage was cause for great celebration, the same cannot be said of pregnancy outside of marriage. As far as I can tell, any woman who became pregnant was expected to immediately marry, and any child conceived out of wedlock was unable to join a guild for its entire life. Wow. That's massively different from our society. Oh, thank you for making that. I do need it. You're just going down the list, son. They were unable to join a guild for the entire life. As well, no revelation was expected from such a mother. This was as equivalent a curse to a lower class woman, as her child would not be able to attend a guild for the upper class. It is still very Abrahamic. I guess that makes sense, because yeah, whenever I was practicing Christianity, Catholicism specifically, it was very, very like you were supposed to be abstinent until marriage. So yeah, that makes sense. As far as I can see, question was a full year. Gestation, sorry. As far as I can see, gestation was a full year. 10 dunny months, 290 dunny days. Equivalent to 1 Earth year. I have found no records of multiple births. Okay, so they only ever actually had one child at a time. There was no twins or anything like that. How are you first? Because no one claimed the first thing. Class structure. Seems as though my first inclination towards class structure was incorrect. Though early on there was little in the way of class society, such a high ideal faded quickly. By 9400 DE, there were 7 very distinct classes. The elite, the lords, and the grandmasters of the major guilds. It was possible for private citizens to be accepted, but if so, abundant resources were needed. It was only the elite who owned private libraries of books and the private islands. Quite a few obvious attempts to reach out and unify the classes, although I'm not sure did much. There were quite a few, although I'm not sure did much good. Common libraries, major guild scholarships, renovation of poorer districts all seemed more political than life-changing. Not surprisingly, I suppose. Guild members. Yes, it was possible for the lower classes to attend, but it seems by the end of the schools were far too expensive and prestigious to allow for such. As a result, the graduates became a class among themselves, and a very high one at that. It's very restrictive of multiplying outside of the context of the culture. I'm not sure I follow what you're trying to say there, Parker, sorry. Upper class. The lowest of the 3 higher classes, such citizens had succeeded in private enterprise and most likely provide the elite with their banks, pubs, etc. No major guild education for the most part, but enough money to buy their way into the upper class. The middle class, mostly shop owners and the like, able to afford some luxuries of Dunny but still considered far from the elite, rare but possible for them to own books as well as private ages, seem to make up most of the minor guild enrollment. The high poor. The higher class of poor seem to be made mostly of industrial workers, and many of whom spent their time on foreign ages, before it was outlawed, of course. It seems that this class, along with the lower two, did not own books. The low poor. I can't seem to find a better name for them, however, it seems clear that there were two classes of poor. These low poor were relegated to their own districts and rarely seen even with the middle class and never with the upper classes. Possibly used as servants, although that was generally looked down upon. Sub-low? Reference to the least, an undefined subclass, are found on rare occasions, not enough data to elucidate? Basically looking down on making children outside of a godly education. Gotcha, okay. Okay, table 1 of 4 done? 4, right? So, about the king's books, there are 8 of them on this roof. There are more. There are 8 of them on this roof. There are more, and there is an order to read them in. So you start with 3 of them and do the other 5 later. Okay. Okay. We read this yesterday. Check this out. I know the DRC doesn't want us to touch these, but I bet Watson would like to know how these register with the doors too. It makes no sense. And don't lose it. I could barely get it off the wall when I did. It was pretty scary. Maybe the weirdest thing that ever is that when I went back later, the cloth I got this piece from was intact again. The start would be Re-Neref, which is the green one near the telescope. Okay. This one? King Re-Neref. Oh, okay. Do I... Wait, okay. Let's go ahead and... King Re-Neref was born in 207 BE, before Earth, on Gardene. He was accepted into the Guild of Writers at the age of 5, a standard age, and as the years passed, quickly became one of the finest writers that the Rorea had ever seen. Certain records go as far as stating that Re-Neref was unsurpassed in skill and by any other writer of the day. Gardene. Okay. By the time he was 90, Re-Neref had achieved the rank of Guild Master and was well on his way to become the Grand Master. However, due to personal convictions, he never achieved that rank. Re-Neref had long been a challenger of the views of the Guild of Writers, as well as the king himself. Re-Neref was apparently very concerned with the society's views pertaining to the purpose of writing and the challenge of acting responsibly with the great gift given to us by Yavo. Around 73 BE, Re-Neref was asked by the Grand Master to write a descriptive book to a questionable age, at least in the eyes of Re-Neref. He perceived the age being used to house an uncivilized race that could be used for the purposes of the Rene. Thus, he refused to carry out the command from his Grand Master, and after much debating was apparently dismissed from the Guild of Writers. Some records do point to Re-Neref willfully excusing himself from the guild, although regardless of how he left, much of the society found the dismissal unfair, and some even went so far as to call it detrimental to society. Around 59 BE, the fact that Gardene would not be able to serve the Rene as a home for much longer was confirmed, and the information made public. Re-Neref had long known of the state of Gardene and from the time of his dismissal had apparently been working on an age that he felt would be a good place to live for those who wished to follow him. According to various journals, Reef managed to attract a few thousand Rene and convince them to follow him in the ways that he felt important and to the age that he had written. The king allowed Reef to split away from the Rene, along with a few other smaller groups, while the majority of the Rene left Gartene to a new homeworld called Terahas? Terahi? Reef took his group to Earth, where he established the Dunny, meaning new beginning. Terani. Okay, so the Dunny's a split-off civilization from the Rene. I'm probably butchering the pronunciations. I do apologize. Interesting. And yeah, Reef wrote Earth. So that, like, literally, okay, well, yeah, he wrote the initial link to Earth, which is how the Dunny got to Earth in the first, well, the Rene, which turned into the Dunny. The Dunny meaning new beginning. Okay. Reef was a strong leader, immediately establishing himself as king and reigning for 120 years until his death. Obviously, those who followed Reef to Dunny already respected him enough to separate themselves from their family and friends, and thus records point to very few debates or disagreements within the society under the reign of Reef. So somewhere is a descriptive. I would love to read the descriptive book of Earth and just how that'd be so cool. The Dunny split off from the Rene. Okay, yes. As had always been the case with the Rene, a group of surveyors was sent to Dunny before the group officially moved there to establish the Great Zero? Z-E-R? Is that say zero? The Great Zero and the line emanating from it. A monument was built on the Great Zero in the year 0 DE. Unlike previous occasions, Reef established the line of the Great Zero as set apart for holy buildings, without authorization by the reigning king. Construction was forbidden. Though it's never stated directly, records strongly imply that it was Reef who chose where the city would be established. He seemed to base his decision on two factors, which probably made the decision an easy one. First was the line of the Great Zero. It seemed an obvious spot to base the city, with the most important religious structures being directly on the line, and the rest of the city surrounding its center. The second factor was a group of waterfalls that flowed from the ceiling of the cavern to an area adjacent to the line of the Great Zero. The fresh flowing water was perfect for drinking. A new writers' guild with fairly different rules than the one that had existed on Gartene was constructed almost immediately, 8 DE, under the direction of Reef. By the year 100 DE, Reef had directed the recreation of the 18 major guilds. I was wondering how many guilds there actually were. There's 18. Okay. The guilds were dedicated to Yavo on the Day of the Circle, a celebration not only of the completion of the major guilds, but a celebration of new guilds, which Reef believed were healthier than those that had existed in Gartene. Guilds that had been established to please Yavo and not themselves, Reef said. Certain records point to the guilds on Gartene becoming extremely competitive with one another and focusing more upon having the best facility than carrying out their duty to Yavo and the people. In an effort to curb that kind of competition, Reef implemented a list of restrictions upon the guild construction. The restrictions included guidelines pertaining to placement facing the Great Zero, size, shape, and minor visual guidelines. Though one of Reef's top priorities was construction of a temple, there were disagreements as to specifics, causing numerous delays in the finalization of construction plans. Eventually, construction was started in 48 DE and the temple was completed in 63 DE, known as the Regeltovorum, Regeltovorum, Regetovorium of the temple to Yavo was meant. The temple to Yavo was meant as a place to worship as well as a reminder of the prophesied great king who would come to them soon. The Great Zero is basically the declared center of an age. Geographical location information is established in relationship to it. Got you. Thank you. Okay. Cool. Rena Reef also made it a priority to install massive fans that would supply the cavern with fresh air. Natural openings existed, but it was quickly discovered that they did not supply ample circulation for the cavern. As a result, massive shafts and fans were built and installed over a 30-year period between 84 and 114 DE. It should be noted that numerous records point to a small group of Dunny disappearing upon completion of the fans. It is most often assumed that they remained on the surface of Earth to live. Where was I at? We noted that numerous records point to a small group of Dunny disappearing upon completion of the fans. It is most often assumed that they remained on the surface of Earth to live. Throughout his reign, records point to multiple occasions on which Rena Reef refused to build a palace for himself. Instead, he lived in a fairly basic home, similar in fashion to most of his fellow citizens, and made it especially clear that until Yavo had a new home, he could not allow himself one. Although even after the temple was completed, Rena Reef refused to build a palace, always focusing more on the religious and government sites. Rena Reef's own philosophy centered on the fact that it was much easier to focus on Yavo and his wishes when circumstances were difficult and struggles more abundant. It was strongly believed that Rena Reef's refusal to build a palace was an expression of that philosophy. In 120 DE, Rena Reef died of apparent heart complications. He was 327 years old. Though he had married, he had left no children. As a result, he chose one of his apprentices named Alish to succeed him. Yeah. Taken from the memories of Alish. From the Oath of the New Guild of Writers written by Rena Reef. Taken from the journals of the Grand Master. Oh, are these annotations? Oh, these are annotations. Okay. Garney's sun was dying and would eventually cause a rapid decrease in temperature, making it an uninhabitable age. That's why they had to move. Oh, and here's where it tells me the Great Zero itself was usually based on a prominent natural landmark. Within the age from the Great Zero, a line was drawn, usually toward magnetic north, to aid in navigation, construction, etc. It should be noted that the 18 major guilds of Dunny were not necessarily the same as the 18 that had existed on Gartnay. In fact, they were probably much different. Though there is no information that details the major guilds of Gartnay, we do know that the guilds were meant to be flexible and serve the people in the needs of their life. That mention of a small group leaving Dunny and maybe remaining on the surface of Earth to live there, that is the theory that Keta, Gen's wife, and Atris's mother, is a far descendant of that group that left, since Gen did point out the similarities between her people and the Dunny. Okay. Okay, cool. Oh, hold on. So, okay, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so all of the 8 remaining books are books of the king, right? Next book is Alish. Okay. King Alish. This one, right? they crossed out the O's and made a little face down here. It's fun. Ooh, let me get a drink real quick before I start this one. This is cool. I'm loving all this lore. This is actually fantastic. Okay. This is actually making me excited though, because like I think like we're getting close to being able to actually go or do the to Dunny expansion, right? Which is like we're actually going to be able to like, go Dunny, and then we're going to be able to see everything that's being talked about, really. Okay. King Elish took the throne in coronation ceremonies in the year 120 DE at the age of 170. Though it seemed Elish had never been a member of the Writers Guild on Gartenay, he had spent the first 50 years of his life with Rena Reef after his own dismissal, working on the Book of Dunny. When the Dunny Writer Guild was formed in the year 8 DE, Rena Reef made sure Elish was placed in charge of the first Grand Master of the guild. This is a perfect lead into the Dunny content. See clip, there you go. There's confirmation. You've done good. You have done good and taking my leash for this game and guiding me to what I actually need to do next. So I don't just go, what's all this random information that has no context to like hours later in the game. You've done good. I'm proud of you. As Grand Master, he had worked closely with Rena Reef in the writing of the new Guild of Writers. Oh, wait, hold on. As Grand Master, he had worked closely with Rena Reef in the writing of the new Guild of Writers Oath. The Oath, which was what every member promised to live by, ended up staying in existence with few minor changes until 9400 DE. Records indicate that Elish modeled his life very closely to Rena Reef's. He refused to build himself a palace until a common library was opened, as he strongly supported a place where all citizens could have access to books. Though there was some minor disagreement on minor issues, the building was eventually finished in 233 DE, although, like his mentor, Elish still refused to build himself a palace. The reign of Elish was extremely similar to that of Rena Reef. There was still great excitement for the new ideals and laws of Dunny, and thus great support for Elish, making his reign a very smooth one. Before his third son was born in 256 DE, records indicate that there was a bit of public apprehension over who the next king would be. Elish's two eldest sons were fairly rebellious, and neither seemed good candidates for the throne, at least in the public's opinion. However, as Elish's third son grew, it became apparent to the public, although records never gave specific reasons, that the boy closely followed his father's ideals. Elish must have agreed with the public's opinion, as it was his third son who he selected to succeed him. Elish died of natural causes at the age of 350. Okay. Somat is the next one, purple one near the telescope again? Okay. Which is the king that you read about who killed his brothers? Oh, the one on Ederkimo? When I was trying to find that last page for Relto? Okay. Well, we kind of already know how this king thinks, which maybe bodes to King Elish not having a good heir. Oh no. King Somat. Somat took the throne in the year 300 DE at the age of 44. That's also relatively young compared to the other two. Up to the point of his coronation, he had been a member of the Guild of Writers. He continued his study of the art through private mentors for a number of years after his coronation. It was the lack of proper guild instruction that most Dunny historians attribute to the distorted views Somat later took on. It was an up and down reign, partly due to a tremendous tension that seemed to exist between himself and his older brothers. Both of the brothers, though they had little respect, did everything in their power to make Somat's reign tumultuous. One of the first actions Somat ordered was construction of a palace, When it was completed in 347 DE, Somat moved in with his family, although his brothers refused and maintained their own homes. Such an act was regarded as tremendous disrespect to a family and only served to widen the gap between Somat and his brothers. Furthering tensions not only within Somat's family but within the culture as well as the lavishness of the palace, ornate gardens were present inside the physical grounds, and garden ages were written as well, linking from within the palace. Rumors abounded that some of these garden ages were even wiped of their inhabitants in order to provide Somat with relaxation. Whether true or not, Somat often spoke publicly of the need for ages to serve the Dunny. This was a first for the society and a direct contradiction to what the guilds taught. The Dunny were to serve the ages. It seems that eventually the tension became too much. Some say it drove Somat mad. In 387 DE, both his brothers disappeared, we know what happened, and were never found again. It was commonly presumed that Somat wrote a death book to which both of his brothers were linked into, although it could never be proven. Not even just a trap book, an actual death book. God. Regardless, it was one of the first major challenges for the people of Dunny, and they reacted quickly. A prophetess was supplied to Somat in 400 DE in an attempt to guide him in the ways of Yavo. For the 155 remaining years of his reign, it seemed that most people believed Somat became a better king. The prophetess became an excellent mentor for Somat and eventually convinced him to choose the son of one of his close friends as the heir to the throne. His own children were admittedly out of control, as it turns out. It was the bloodline of that child that led to the birth of the great king years later. Somat died of natural causes at the age of 299. Okay. I'm glad he was able to get his shit together, basically. Thank God for the prophetess. Women were generally seen as much better communicators with Yavo than men. As a result, most prophets were women. The choosing of prophetess as guides for the king started with Somat and became tradition for all the remaining kings of Dunny. It was usually up to the king as to which prophet or prophetess he would seek for wisdom. Okay. And you said those are the only 3 to read now, and we'll read the other 5 later? But leave them for now. Okay, we're going to go on a quick ad break as I recover my voice, and then when we get back, we will venture into the first expansion. Is the first expansion to Dunny? I'm gonna guess. Okay. Yes, to Dunny. Awesome. I'm excited. I've been wanting to explore Dunny for so long. I think the time is finally upon us. Ugh. Oh, my poor Durg voice. That wasn't even all the books. There's still 5 more books here. Oh my gosh. Well, that's gonna be a fun YouTube episode. I wonder how many thumbs down I'm gonna get by people who are coming into the channel not knowing what to expect, not coming into the game not knowing what to expect. Although to be fair, it is like probably gonna be like halfway through the actual series, so if someone's actually watching it, they probably know what they're getting into. Oh. Okay. Good thing Durgs have resilient voices. Are you calling me a Skyrim Durg? Is that what you're calling me? Because I know that Skyrim Durgs use the voice to use like their breath abilities and stuff. What's a sack lunch? I really want to know what's inside the sack lunch. I'm going to read this, actually. The last batch of papers you sent were very interesting. Since you did such a good job, I've got another list I'd like you to divvy up to the team. Here's how you do it's up to you. I'd like more information on family life, ceremonies, etc. Anything related to birth, marriage, cultural events. I know we have quite a bit of source material for this, so anything you get would be quite helpful. I think we've gathered quite a bit on science and technology, and not enough on the personal lives of these people. We have quite a bit of guild information, but gathering all up into one tidy area would be nice. The fall is still an obvious area where we're lacking. I'm not sure I can help you with research material, but given the latest information we are getting, at some time we are going to have to dig into this. I recommend assigning someone to the sole task of the fall. Continue on with the kings. A short synopsis of all the kings would be helpful following the form you started with the last batch. We still have religious writings. We need to translate these. These are going to be the most difficult, but I think they can give us large amounts of helpful information. We have a stack of journals from various Dunny residences, etc., not to mention ages. I think that will be more than enough for now. Again, thank your team and tell them they are doing great work, Dr. Watson. Okay. Where the heck is my book, and why did someone steal it in the first place? Interesting. It seems like this is where they were like doing a lot of like the writing and the translating for all these books. This is kind of why probably they're all over here. Nick is referring to the Samat book you found at Entercamo. It was moved there by someone. I wonder who this someone might be. I remember very early on in my let's go ahead and head back to Rauta to get ready for the next step in our journey. But I remember very early in our adventure in UrU, there was specifically in Teledon, there was someone who seemed very dissatisfied with the DRC. I wonder if that particular someone might have something to do with the books going missing. Douglas Sharper. Thank you for the reminder of the name. To start to Denis, use the first page of the middle blue linking book. This one. Thank you for specifying first page, so I didn't just click on it. Okay. Let's do this. It's a beach ball. Okay.